In these times during COVID, when we're all sitting at home, it's sort of like a ray of light that we get to watch these amazing sessions when we can't all be together. It certainly brightens up my evenings.
आज पेंडेमिक में हम डिजिटली जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल कर रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारे सामने श्रोता नहीं है, हम आपस में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उस फील को, उस उमंग को महसूस कर सकते हैं कि हजारों लाखों लोग हमसे जुड़े हुए हैं, हमको सुन रहे हैं और कहीं ना कहीं कोई एक सार्थक हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है.
People who came online to view and listen to our incredible speakers from across the world, we were able to continue in our tradition of ensuring the free flow of knowledge and information.
On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, Sanjoy Roy, and all of us at Teamwork Arts, I welcome you to this session of Jaipur Literature Festival Online Series 2021. It's our pleasure to present today Regrets None, Dolly Thakore and Arghya Lahiri in conversation with Sanjoy Roy. Veteran theatre personality Dolly Thakore's memoir, Regrets None, co-authored with Arghya Lahiri, is a vivid retelling of her life and career. Written with wit and trademark candour, the narrative takes us through her years in Delhi, casting for Gandhi and filming it across India, working in radio, advertising and television, while always returning to her first love, theatre. She also speaks candidly about love, infidelity, motherhood, commitment, ecstasy, and the heartbreaks. In conversation with Sanjoy Roy today, they discuss the glitz, glamour, and struggles that have formed her life and the no regrets philosophy that characterizes her personality. Dolly Thakore is a veteran actor, newscaster, columnist, and casting director who's worked in advertising, communications, and public relations. She's also a staunch social activist, particularly for children and destitute women and for citizens for peace. Arghya Lahiri is a writer, theatre director, lighting designer, and filmmaker. He's worked in the theatre in every capacity he can lay his hands on for over 20 years. Regrets None is his second book. Sanjoy Roy, an entrepreneur of the arts, is the managing director of Teamwork Arts, which produces over 33 highly acclaimed performing arts, visual arts, and literary festivals in 40 cities across the world, including the iconic annual Jaipur Literature Festival, international editions of JLF, and the JLF Brave New World and Jaipur Literature Festival series launched during the lockdown. He is a founder trustee of Salam Balak Trust, providing support services for street and working children in Delhi. Roy works closely with various industrial bodies on the government and policy issues in the cultural sector in India and has lectured and collaborated with leading international universities. He's the co-chair of the FICCI Creative Industries Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present Regrets None, Dolly Thakore, Arghya Lahiri in conversation with Sanjoy Roy. Over to you, Sanjoy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharupa. Thank you for the introductions and welcoming us all onto Jaipur Literature Festival, our digital series. And what better way to celebrate this weekend than to listen to Dolly Thakore and Arghya Lahiri talking about No Regrets, her wonderful new book, which I had the occasion of receiving on Monday, immediately plunged into it. And it was literally every page was a memory from the past. So before I even ask her a question, it is a book, it's not only about Dolly's life, it's about a whole period in theatre history. It's also about the way a person like her has lived her life, as she says, with no regret. And it's been a great pleasure, Dolly, to have you back on the show. I know in a normal situation, we would be doing this over many a glass of espresso martini, even if it's not at the St. James Hotel in London. And I wish we could have done it in person because our adda would have been much more exciting. But hey, these are different times, and irrespective, it's still wonderful to have you on board. So let me start straight up and ask you, you've said regrets none, and yet you begin the book by asking Quasar, your son, to understand and apologizing to your mum and dad.
What is the question there then?
Is there a dichotomy between these two?
I've had no problems at all. I've never had any secrets from anybody. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I lay out everything. I share everything with my friends or the people that I know. So I've had no problems at all sharing anything that I've put down in the book. I must have had great fun revisiting all those memories and people, and it's amazing because since now it's created quite a lot of media hype, the number of people who've written back from my past who are enjoying what I said. Let me please tell you, there is a fly. Now, when I was in Doordarshan, there used to be a fly bothering me all the time when I was reading the news. And that's exactly what's happened. All these years, I've never had a fly. And today, that fly has come back again.
No, amazing. But, what intrigued me is that there you are, and you edited copy, and you're known for crossing your T's and dotting your I's. You're also known for your forthright, frank sort of approach to anything that you do. Why did you decide to have a co-writer?
No, because I started writing in 1982, which was one of the points in my life which stirred me on to put down my thoughts, etc. And then for 30 years, I didn't touch it. And then suddenly Quasar said, Mama, why don't you write the book? And he said, because I had written it, but I hadn't transcribed the thing onto my desktop or whatever. And so he got Arghya Lahiri, who I adore. And he said, let him listen to you, tape it, and put it all together. And that's how it helped, because as I said, over 30 years, I used to go back to it every 15 years or 20 years. And I must say he's done a marvelous job of it, and I'm so happy with it.
Arghya, two questions for you. One is from a lighting designer who was struck by the beauty of lighting, of climbing a mountain way back in Kenya, to becoming a director and a writer. In any book like this, in a memoir, especially of somebody like Dolly, who has at least 15,000 conversations in a day, meets a dozen people, how did you decide what to keep in and what to leave out?
I think, it's true. The size and scope of it is the extraordinary thing. I am actually going to claim a little bit of credit for getting to restart. We were working on a play. This wasn't even a gleam in anybody's eye in 2015. And I went across to run lines with her, which is what one does. And she told me a story which is in the book right towards the end about how she quit smoking. And I heard this story and I said to her, you need to write a book. And she said, I've actually started one several times. And I found Quasar and I said, listen, she needs to be telling these stories. And if you need any help telling these stories, I'm happy, because I just think that this needs to be out in the world.
I didn't know any of this. Please let me tell you.
The scope and size of her life is just epic. So that's one part. Second part of it, I think there's already plans for a sequel, as it were, about the stories that didn't get into it. But it's just, look, it's her story. Everything we tried to retain as much of it as we could. Obviously, there are things that we decided not to put in, whether they were things that were of only interest to close family members, or Dolly herself, or they're things that are perhaps not very interesting for the lay person to read, etc., etc. We just try to give the world a sense of what this woman's life has been, and it's not just her experiences; it's also the fact that she was born on the cusp of independence and has seen the journey that this country has had. She was working in England before an NRI was even a term. She was a broadcaster, a radio host. She created these jobs for herself, and it's just an incredible story. So we went with whatever served that kind of scope of his life.
Dolly, memory is such a strange thing of what you remember and what you forget, or sometimes what you choose to forget. And this is something that I was speaking to Quasar yesterday, and I said, what's your memory? And we were talking about the blank walls when you came back home with Quasar and Alec had left with all the paintings. And Quasar said, well, that's not how I remember it later. I remember our house being so filled with people that you never saw any blankness. So in your telling of the story, and everybody from Amitabh Bachchan and Raka and Tarakeshwari Sinha and your cousins and the driver in the truck doing unspeakable things all the way till the end of the book, did you make notes? How did you sort of keep, or did it sort of get churned out in bits and pieces as you recollected?
No, I have a terrific memory. I never kept notes. Everything was there in my head, and when I began to write, it just poured out. I remember names, I remember dates. I was very good at that. I don't know whether I can claim that today, but at this age, but it was wonderful. But then I did keep diaries, but those diaries didn't have any of these details that you actually read in my book. And I'm still reliving it. In fact, I have my sister who rings me up and says, how do you remember all that? She's the closest to me who has lived the life with me. So it's just that I do have a memory and I have an eye for details. So I remember details of that time.
The details is what's really made the book, whether it was holding hands or clammy hands under the mosquito net when your 26-year-old first crush came to visit. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about the life of Dolly Rawson.
A very secure life, comfortable, and because my father was in the Air Force, there was no discrimination. There was no being criticized or condemned for not belonging to a family or not belonging to a particular religion or anything like that. And fortunately, at that time, Delhi, Kanpur, Hyderabad, we didn't have these distinctions of wanting to be in a political family. Later on, as one grew older, the stress on father's MP, father is minister, all that came in. But at that time, there was none of that. So it was such a happy growing up with all the securities. You didn't feel insecure about anything. It didn't matter whether my father didn't have a big long car or and there was no jetting around in those days. People didn't go on holidays abroad. So it was a very acceptable, comfortable, confident childhood that I've had, and I didn't feel that till in fact I think till I've come and lived in Bombay again.
At the age of 13, and this is the time when you didn't even have your bindi, which is of course your trademark in so many ways, you could pretty much hold your own in any place and forget the convents, etc. And that gave you the confidence in so many ways, even in your romantic liaison with somebody who was 26, or your innocent romantic liaison with. Give us what made Dolly then. I mean, what is it that gave you that kind of confidence that you were able to go out and conquer the world?
Let's be honest. Everybody craves for a certain kind of attention, a special kind of attention. And it wasn't that you went out for it or you chased it. It just happened. And it was lovely. It made you feel so good. It made you feel special. It made you feel selected. It made you feel happy about it. And there was no way that you were going to share it with people. It was all hidden. So there was, again, a certain amount of romance about that. And I mean, but I've enjoyed every step. Of course, there was pain when it drifted. But then I am that kind of a person. I hold very great store with the relationships that I've had, friends, etc. And I don't think I've had that kind of disappointment in friends, but I've certainly had it in the people who I specially paid attention to.
You're a lover of people. You're a lover of conversations, and you open your heart and you immediately engage somebody in conversation, whether it was at the airport where you met a dear friend who became a dear friend of yours later, or with anybody. That character of yours to be able to engage just about anybody with a conversation and strike up that conversation with, you know, would you have a light for my cigarette? Tell us about the kinds of people who you came across, encountered in this way.
You know, Sanjoy, the kind of people I like are doers. And it doesn't matter what they're doing. But it has to be somebody who's interesting. And I have no hesitation in starting a conversation with them. So it could be the woman in the ladies' washroom at the airport. And I've had great conversations with them. Or it could be the taxi driver. These days, the Uber drivers are very interesting. I have great conversations with them. So it's not that they have to be socialites or anything like that. And maybe that makes them open up to me and makes me pour my heart to them too, if that's required. Or tell them my story if it's required.
Arghya, in writing this book, I mean, you know, you've had to encounter, like I said, everybody from Amitabh Bachchan upwards and downwards. There's nobody who's not there.
You know, I don't know why everybody mentions Amitabh Bachchan. Amitabh Bachchan was a brief encounter at a play that I did in which I was the lead and he was just a sidey in it. But
well, he did come to your bedside. He did come to see you, or Ajitabh came to see you. Ajitabh came to see you.
Yeah, Bunty came, his brother.
Yeah.
And then when he was ill, when he was in hospital at
You went to see him.
I went to see him. I never got to see him because he was in ICU and we weren't allowed. But his mother, you know, in those days we didn't have these class restrictions or anything like that. I walked in there and I was so well received. Hey, you must remember I was already on television. So from the doorman to the liftman to the doctors, the nurses, everybody knew who I was. They'd all heard about the accident that I'd had. And when they all looked at me and said, what the hell are you doing here? And Teji, that's Amitabh's mother, was the first one to say this. And, you know, so I've never felt discriminated against. I've been accepted everywhere I go. And then also the work I've done has given me this openness to people and being accepted everywhere. Whether it was the governor's wife or whether it was a social worker. I've had a very privileged life in that sense.
Arghya, how did you manage to sort of, you know, what Dolly was talking about, the detailing, and what's really made the book so accessible and in so many ways both heartbreaking when you read some of the parts to it, but also so wondrous. It's like a fairy tale, right? Because she goes from incident to accident to incident to accident, and many of the accidents give rise to the incidents in the book. And you've been able to capture it so well. When you were processing this, as you were writing it, what went through your mind?
Well, it's several things. The thing that was very, very important for me, Sanjay, was to be, and you know her, was to be able to capture her voice. Because what the world thinks of her and the people who are close think of her are two very separate things. She is warm, she is wise, she is very funny. She tells a hell of a story. And she has been for me a quasi-parent. She has been a mother figure. She has also been someone I've worked with several times as a director on my own. And all of these qualities, and there is an imp in there, and there is also a grandma. And it was very important to try and get that voice. And the rest of it, I mean, if I may, in response to some of the questions you were asking her, I remember asking her, so we ran a lot of tape. So there were some notes, there were transcripts. We did hours and hours and hours in conversation. I think in one of the ways it helped that I was part of this process is because I know her and I share that with her outside of the book. We have been friends for a very long time, over 20 years. And we are friends. I'm not just, a friend of her son's. But, we'd keep talking and those chats weren't particularly directed. Like we just put the recorder down and just chat. But I remember asking her at some point, because again, like everything else, and she says this over and over again, she says, things just happen. Things just happen. People just step forward, somebody lent a hand, things happened, and the world opened up for me. I remember asking her at some point, and this is about 3 years into the process, I said, you were about to go to England on the strength of a stray conversation with a man you'd never met before or since. Were you not scared? And she went, no, what is there to be scared about? If it didn't work out, I would have gotten on a plane and come back. And she's one of those people who wears that like armor. She's unafraid to ask, she's unafraid to do, and she'll see what will happen.
In fact, Dolly, tell us about your first visit to London. I mean, there you were, you arrived in London, as Arghya said, just on the back of a casual conversation, but immediately things opened up and you started to do a Hindi program. Tell us all.
Sanjay, it wasn't just my getting up and going to London. They helped. I didn't have a passport, I didn't have a ticket, but things just began to fall into place. And my life has been like that. So before I knew it, I had somebody who said, come to London, I'll have a job for you at the BBC. I didn't even have a passport. And suddenly I had somebody sending me papers to sign, fill in for the passport. I had an entry permit to England, which was rare. It was very precious in those days. So, and then when I got there, again, friends who I spoke to, they said, oh, my cousin is there, my brother is there, the person who drove me from the airport to the house where I was staying in Chelsea. It all fell together. It's not that I planned it or I rang up and I made plans. Everything just happened. And I arrived there and the people were very welcoming. They were people I'd never met before. I didn't know who they were. And but they welcomed me in. I've never had an awkward moment in my life.
And it was in London that you also found Farooq. Farooq was there, and
Farooq was not found in London. Farooq and I have grown up together. We've been together since the age of 11 or even less. And so, and one knew that he was there. And naturally, he knew that I was coming. We kept in touch in terms of family, friends, relatives, because we were all one. And my relationships never end. They, move on. And then others know that. So it wasn't as if I was going to be meeting a stranger, except that he was now Cambridge. So one was a bit kind of, wary of what would a little girl from Kanpur, Delhi, say to a guy from Cambridge. I mean, and there he was, this hairy creature, long sweater, shouting "Dollar" down the platform, and it was like we'd never parted, that we were friends all over again. And
but even in London, Dolly, as like in all of the places that you've lived, your house or your apartment, your flat, however small or big it was open for the world to come through. And you cooked for them, you cooked for Farooq and all his friends day in and day out, and you did so much. And there's so many people with so many stories as they made their way to London and through your apartment. Tell us about some of those stories that you've talked about in the book.
Well, they're still friends. They still come to my house. There's Naveen Rat Chawla, who became the election commissioner here. He was a student at London University at the time. And my house has always been an open house. I think Arghya will bear that out, that my doors are always open and anyone can drop in at any time of the day or night. And they never forget that kind of perhaps warmth, hospitality they like. And they remember me. So at 50 years later, when, which I think is in the book, when Naveen Ratchala wrote his book on the elections, etc., and it was launched at the Sophia College, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I had everybody over for dinner here. And there was Naveen Ratchala with his wife here at my place for dinner. And his wife is an art restorer.
Deepika is an art restorer, yeah.
Yeah, and so a lot of my paintings have been restored by her. You know, but as I said, I've never lost touch with anyone. They all remain friends.
And that's where you first encountered Dilip.
Dilip I encountered in London because I was sharing a flat with these 6 other Asian girls. Not one of them was Indian. They were of Indian origin perhaps, but 2 of them were from Sri Lanka, one was from Malaysia, one of them was from the West Indies, one of them was from Kenya, and it was the Kenya one, Shama, who turned out to be Dilip's sister, and Dilip visited the flat very often. And he was an attractive, smart, educated, well-spoken, confident young man, and he was studying at the Lincoln's Inn. Now, as I said, I get very impressed with the kind of thing that people do. So naturally, I noticed that he wasn't a bus conductor or a taxi driver or something. He was an educated man, and he paid attention to me. I don't know whether that's in the book, I can't remember, but I was reading Perfumed Gardens, and Dilip noticed me reading Perfumed Gardens, so I suppose it went through his head, this is an interesting woman to know. And that's how we got friendly.
What again was so interesting is the way that in the book, you have a sense of the future, and even having a sense of the future, you still step into it in the way that you did by marrying Dilip. When you, at one level, you were like, I'm not sure, this is not going to happen, but you went ahead and did that. In many of the incidents, Dolly, one sees this, that you've already seen into the future, but you've sort of perhaps ignored it or allowed yourself to drift through that situation.
Sanjoy, you must remember, I was an Indian girl with from a very conservative background, and so you had the same ideas of marriage, sex, and all that kind of thing. And Dilip, I went to London, I was a virgin then, and everybody, when Dilip and I did get together, and one knew that the relationship was changing now, and that it was a different world. And of course, the thing that was most important was my parents would never get to know, the family would never get to know. So one went ahead, and here one was brought up with what will the neighbors say, what will so-and-so say, it's not the right thing to do. So this was the liberty, the freedom that one got in London. And so when I did, Dilip and I did get together, he was a student, he was going back to Africa, so there was no question of getting married or anything. And then one realized that society in London, almost everybody was coupled, being together, living together, and we were of that age. I was 23, 22, and so we were all, everybody was talking about marriage and sex. It was a very natural
Corollary.
to going into stepping from one step to the other. So we spent almost 3.5 to 4 years together in London, but we never, we spent 2.5 years in London. We went on holidays abroad together. We studied together. I grew up a hell of a lot in terms of my mind opened up to the kind of things that he was reading. While I've done a hell of a lot, there was a lot which was limited. But, it opened up a different world when I was with Dilip. And he rather enjoyed it too. I mean, it was a very compatible relationship. It was just the marriage part, because I was not a Brahmshatri and I was not rich. My parents didn't own estates and things, which his parents did at that time. But it was very nice, very comfortable, a very natural thing to continue in that relationship.
In fact, what was interesting is where you and Arghya write that it's after you both broke up and then separated after you came back to India that you again became best friends for a period. And, it was every night, you were having dinners, etc. Is that one of the sort of, in many ways,
Look,
but you've written no regrets.
Dilip and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, and I got a present from him. So you can imagine that, the relationship never ends, it's there. And I was going to be wearing a sari, but it turned out to be black and silver, which is the last thing that Alec gave me.
Wow.
A few weeks before he died. So my relationships may change, but they never end.
Arghya,
sorry, if I may, Sanjay, she says something towards the end of the book. She says, because she gave of herself so completely to every relationship, not just the romantic ones, they never quite end. They change form, and therefore you still have things that are valid but in different ways. I find it astonishing, actually.
Arghya, when you were writing the more heartbreaking portions, when Dolly is abandoned in many ways, Alec has walked out, the people come, take all the stationery away, come back again, take the telephone away. Her sheer, the way she was distraught, did it break your heart? It certainly broke my heart reading how distressed she was and how abandoned she was at that point.
I'm sure it did at that time, but that was 40 years ago, for God's sake. I'm not going to be sitting there drinking and crying all the time. You had to get on. I had a child to look after. But we were in the same circles, we had the same friends. And, of course, as I said, I still hold resentments, but that doesn't mean that I sit and cry or weep over it and not do anything else.
What was lovely was that when Pearl called you after Alec left, tell us about that.
Well, I've always adored Pearl. It's very sad that what happened didn't get me to get close to Pearl, and I never acted in a play with her. But she was a marvelous woman, and I would have loved to have her as a friend, which I didn't. And I know how much I had hurt her, because all of Bombay was shaken up by that, and I would get stories from other people, etc. But so she must have known how distraught I was, because I know how distraught she was when I broke up that relationship. But she was so large-hearted about everything, and so whatever comfort she could give me, she extended her hand and reached out to me, and that's how we became friends.
One of the funniest incidents, I think, in the book is your Twiggy can moment of dressing this model up, and who's then piled on to both of you to get entry into every party. Tell us about that. That was too funny. And did you get your swimming costume finally, or
no,
never again?
I got a swimming costume, but not that one, not the French one that I wanted. But that was very funny, because, mind you, at that time, we were in Cannes, and Cannes was like heaven for you to be there, and nothing was more important than being with the kind of people you were, all the creative directors of Lintas from around the world. So it was such a high. And in the midst of that comes this, and in those days the Dior fashions were very much I was wearing my saris and my cholis and my bindi and all that. But there was this girl, beautiful, tall, lovely, and you know, those blunt haircuts were the craze in those days, and who said, "Oh, you're like an Indian princess." Now, who doesn't want compliments like that? Of course, I was thrilled to be called an Indian princess amongst all these people in Cannes. And she took us for dinner. We went to this fabulous dinner. We had the most expensive wine and food. And bloody hell, at the end of that dinner, she disappeared into the kitchen and comes back and says, "Ooh la la, I forgot my wallet at home." Alec looked at me, I looked at her. We were all very short of foreign exchange in any case, and this is going back to 1974, 75, I think it was, and or 76, and Alec took out his wallet and then counted out the money, and I was looking at it because everything was just coming out, and she said, and then we paid up, and she walked back with us. We were hoping that we could ditch her because there was so much we wanted to share and talk about and curse her perhaps. We walked down the Croisette again, and I was looking at the shops, and that's when Alex said, "Tumne apna bikini kha liya," in Hindi, so that you didn't understand, because there was a bikini that I had seen, a black bikini, and I said, "Oh, I'd like that," and he said in Hindi, "Tumne to bikini kha liya." And so she said, "What did he say? What did he say?" No, please tell me. So I told her. And she said, "I work here, I live here, I get 50% discount. You will have the bikini tomorrow." Because at that hour of the night, the shops were all closed. She bloody well disappeared.
It was hysterical, and it was so Cannes in so many different ways, where everybody wants to get access.
The funny story.
It's a good punchline as well, although we won't spoil it.
It continues because in all this lovely conversation that we were having at the Latin Quarter, she suddenly said, "Sorry," and I, like a fool, said, "Yes, come tomorrow." Sorry, which was the closing of the Cannes festival, the advertising festival. So. But then after this episode, Alec and I decided that we are going to run away. I don't want to give her a sari or anything. We want to have nothing to do with her. So we were going to escape from the hotel an hour earlier than we'd asked her to come. But she bloody well turned up 2 hours earlier. So there was nothing we could do.
And you dressed her up, and gave her your
locket. And my silver locket, and I put a bindi, and she walked down the Croisette with everybody looking at her and saying how lovely she looked, and but all that was fine. We tried to avoid her, but she wended her way in, came right in. She had on my sari, she had on my jewelry, she had, and everybody was complimenting her. And at the end of it, she suddenly disappeared. And because we were all going to a casino and things. And I said, now what does one do? So we said, no, she knows where we live. And she knows we're leaving tomorrow morning. We were leaving the next day for Nice, on our way to Greece, in fact. And she, but there was no sign of her. So I went to the concierge just before leaving, or that when we got home, and I wrote a letter to say, "This is my address in
Mademoiselle."
London.
You said Mademoiselle, yeah.
You can please send the things or the parcel to this address, which was in London. And I wrote on top of it, "Mademoiselle Alexandra." Concierge looked at it and said, "Mademoiselle Alexandra? She's not a woman, she's a man." And we didn't know what to do. I felt foolish and at the same time, so shocked about it. And that's a story we've dined on very often.
It's hysterical. I'm conscious we only have a few more minutes and we need to fast forward. One of the things, you talked about eating, having, both of you eating your khana and therefore not being able to afford the bikini. Fiscal discipline was your sort of main task. Everything you guys used to sort of, really divide up. every rupee, every dollar. And there's an awful time where I think Alec comes and pays the hospital bill at one point in time and turns it on and says something very, very unnecessary. And you owe me X amount of money. And Pratima goes and picks up that money from your wallet and puts it out.
Sanjay, these are stories that I remember of my relationship. They also throw some light on the kind of pain, heartbreak, whatever one has had in life. But that's all in the past. It's all gone. I remember them, but that doesn't mean that I hold it, or I could still say he owes me so and so or so much. As I said, the last year before he died, I was staying in Christmas Eve, which is the flat that he was living in, and we were friends, and everybody knows that we were friends. We didn't discuss what had happened in the past. As I said, I've written in the book, we were watching some serial or the other, but it's I hold no grudges anymore.
And did you get a stake of the 28,000 rupees that he gave you, and then you lent him back?
No, all that went. I mean, Avas went, whatever happened went. But I did visit Avas. In fact, I took my entire Loreto gang on one weekend. So now I saw 6 years ago, 8 years ago. And everybody that's mentioned in the book, 8 of us, I think, had come to Bombay to spend a weekend, and I took them to ours. So, I mean, it was a very friendly kind of thing. I'm surprised that people hold grudges that go on for years, and I won't see you, and I won't enter there. I don't have time for all that. I wouldn't be who I am if I did.
Two quick last questions for both of you and Arghya. One is that, you're always in the book, at least the way it's been written, and I know that's true for you, is that you're always surprised that you have a place at the top table. You're always, how did I get here? That kind of sense.
Yeah, because
the other thing that sort of comes through the book is, and I could be completely wrong, Christian guilt. Did it shape you? How did that sort of impact your world?
As I said, in Delhi, one became aware of this division between the Christians and the non-Christians, and the fact that we were bootlicking the British and receiving milk tins and rice from the British, and that did play on one's mind, not consciously but subconsciously. I became very aware of that. That I went to London, where it was a breath of fresh air. You never had any of this kind of discrimination, and then I returned to Bombay. Bombay was again like a breath of fresh air, because society was so open, so happy. So there were socials, there was interaction between the boys and the girls and the men. And, it was wonderful. But look what's happened to our country now. It's all gone. It's very sad. I am sad that the younger generation is not going to enjoy that kind of acceptance, friendliness, warmth, embracing everybody in terms of food, in terms of religion, in terms of clothes, in terms of rich or poor or whatever. That has all gone, which is
look at the incident with the bangle seller, where he was beaten up for hiding his name. But in many ways,
exactly.
Your story is that. Arghya, your perception, just closing on, as I said, both these
I think
not belonging to the top.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, and it also goes back to the question you asked about Dilip. I think what is fascinating about her, as an outside sort of viewpoint, is the wonderfully Indian modern situation of watching someone dismantle their misconceptions and the conditioning that was handed down to her as a woman, as a Christian, as not from a particularly rich family, as someone in a newly independent country, as a defense forces kid. And all of these things got handed to her, expectations were set down, she was meant to be a certain way. Before she goes to Miranda House, she was like, I'll study law, 2 years, I'll get married. And that is one of the courses that her life could have taken. She wouldn't have been Dolly Thakore then. I think she would have married a good Christian boy. But I think the story of the book is how just being in the right place and being open to these influences and the people that you meet, and the fact that there may be another way to look at the world and at your life, you could end up here, where you're looking back at 78 years of an extraordinary tapestry. And it has to do with questioning these things. Yes, you've been handed them, but why can't I work? Why can't I have a child? Why can't I have a child out of wedlock? Why can't I bring that one up on me? Why can't I take the financial, brunt of that? And I will own all of those things. It hasn't been an easy ride in any single way, but I will own every single one of those things and still, get through it. Sorry, have I?
Dolly Thakore, Nirosan, or Dolly Thakore Nirosan, Kavita from the British broadcasting, Arghya Lahiri. There's so much more to unpack in this wonderful, heartbreaking, laugh a minute book that really travels the world. I haven't even been able to touch on even 1% of the wonderful escapades that Dolly got up to, whether it was on the train or on her holidays or on her trekking or with Pratima and going across the country in trains during the Miss India programs. But there'll be more occasions to do this. And I look forward to having many more wonderful fireside chats, not just this Zoom way, but physically. But best wishes, and I know that this book will really change the way that people write their memoirs. It's a tell-all, it's laying your soul bare, it's brave, and more strength to you. You have been an incredible human being. Yes, you've always felt you've been on the periphery of things, but hey, what a life you've lived. Amazing. Thank you both for joining us on this conversation. Sharupa?
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dolly, Arghya, and Sanjoy, for that candid, warm conversation. You absolutely sparkle, Dolly. It's been lovely for all of us to listen in onto this conversation. Thank you all for being a great audience. On behalf of all of us, please stay safe, and we'll see you here next week on the 3rd of September. Good evening.
In these times during COVID, when we're all sitting at home, it's sort of like a ray of light that we get to watch these amazing sessions when we can't all be together. It certainly brightens up my evenings.
आज पेंडेमिक में हम डिजिटली जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल कर रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारे सामने श्रोता नहीं है, हम आपस में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उस फील को, उस उमंग को महसूस कर सकते हैं कि हजारों लाखों लोग हमसे जुड़े हुए हैं, हमको सुन रहे हैं और कहीं ना कहीं कोई एक सार्थक हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है.
People who came online to view and listen to our incredible speakers from across the world, we were able to continue in our tradition of ensuring the free flow of knowledge and information.